My mother cried at my wedding because I married a teacher instead of a doctor, and then she refused to speak to his family. The champagne flute trembled in my hand as my mother rose from her seat at the head of the reception table. Her smile was fixed, polished, the same smile she'd worn for every family photograph since I could remember. But I knew that smile. I knew the tension behind it, the barely contained disapproval that simmered beneath her carefully maintained composure. She tapped her glass with a silver fork, and the room fell silent. 200 guests turned their attention to her, expecting warmth, expecting celebration. Instead, she spoke of sacrifice, of potential, of the challenges I would face in my chosen path. She spoke of my husband's noble but modest career as a high school teacher. She spoke of how she'd always dreamed of me marrying a doctor. And then she cried, not happy tears, tears of disappointment. I sat frozen, my new husband's hand gripping mine under the table, as my mother's words rained down like poison on our wedding day. I'd always known my mother wanted more for me. She'd made that clear from the moment I could understand language. "You can be anything you want to be," she'd say, her eyes gleaming with ambition that wasn't quite mine. "A doctor? A lawyer? A CEO? The world is yours for the taking." She'd say it like a blessing, but I'd always heard it as a command. There was no room for failure in her vision, no room for mediocrity, no room for anything less than spectacular. My sister Vanessa had fulfilled that vision perfectly. She was a cardiologist, married to a surgeon, living in a sprawling suburban home with 2 perfect children. Every holiday, every family gathering, my mother would beam at her with pride so radiant it almost blinded me. "Your sister is so successful," she'd say, patting Vanessa's hand. "She really made something of herself." The implication, of course, was that I hadn't. I'd always been the good girl in my mother's eyes, the obedient one, the one who didn't cause trouble. But I'd also been the disappointment, not in any overt way. My mother was too polished for outright criticism. It was in the little things. The way she'd change the subject when I talked about my work. The way she'd ask, "Are you still doing that?" as if my career was a phase I'd eventually outgrow. The way she'd sigh when I told her I wasn't ready to settle down, wasn't ready to find a suitable husband. And then I met Leo. Leo was everything my mother never wanted for me. He was kind and gentle and funny. He was also a high school teacher. When I told my mother I was dating a teacher, she'd laugh, a short, brittle sound that made my stomach clench. "A teacher," she'd repeated, as if I'd said I was dating a circus performer. "Well, I suppose someone has to educate the children." She'd said it with a smile, but I knew what she meant. Leo wasn't suitable. Leo wasn't a doctor. Leo wasn't what she'd dreamed of for me, but Leo was what I'd dreamed of for myself. He was patient and understanding. He listened when I talked. He held me when I cried. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed since I was a child. He saw me for who I was, not who I was supposed to be. When he proposed, I said yes without hesitation. He'd gotten down on one knee in the middle of our favorite park, his hands trembling slightly, his eyes full of hope. I'd cried, he'd cried. We'd laughed through our tears. It was perfect. But when I told my mother, the silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. "Are you sure?" she'd finally said. "Really sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I told her. She'd sighed, that familiar sound of disappointment. "Well, I suppose you know what you're doing." I chose to ignore the doubt in her voice. I chose to believe she'd come around. I chose to believe that, when she saw how happy Leo made me, she'd finally accept him. I was wrong. The wedding planning was a nightmare. My mother wanted to control everything: the venue, the flowers, the guest list. She wanted to invite doctors and lawyers and people she considered suitable. She wanted to turn my wedding into a networking event, a showcase of her daughter's connections. "We want something small," I'd told her. "Something intimate. Just family and close friends." "Small?" she'd repeated, her voice sharp. "Rebecca, you're my daughter. This is my only chance to show off. You can't have a small wedding." I'd tried to compromise. I'd tried to find a middle ground. But every decision I made, she'd find a way to undermine it. The colors were too bright. The flowers were too common. The venue was too far from her house. And Leo. She never stopped criticizing Leo. "He's sweet," she'd say, the word dripping with condescension. "But is he really enough? For you, I mean. He's more than enough," I'd tell her. "He's everything." She'd nod, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. The disappointment, the resentment. The day of the wedding dawned gray and drizzly. I'd hoped for sunshine, but the weather matched my mood. Uncertain, tense, waiting for something to break. My mother arrived at the bridal suite with a posse of her friends, all of whom seemed to be under strict instructions to keep the mood positive. "Don't you look beautiful?" my mother said, her voice tight. "The dress is lovely." I knew what she meant. She'd wanted me to wear her wedding dress. I'd refused. I'd chosen something simple, something that felt like me. She'd never forgiven me for it. Leo's family arrived early. They were warm and welcoming. Nothing like the cold, polished relatives I'd grown up with. His mother hugged me tight. His father clapped Leo on the shoulder and said, "You're a lucky man." His siblings teased him mercilessly. They were everything I'd ever wanted in a family, but my mother barely looked at them. She spent the reception avoiding their corner of the room, hovering near her own friends, making pointed remarks about the quality of the guests. "It's a shame," I overheard her saying to one of her friends, "that Rebecca chose such a modest wedding. I always imagined something grander, something more befitting. I pretended I hadn't heard. I pretended it didn't hurt. I pretended everything was fine. And then she gave the speech. The tapping of the champagne glass was like a death knell. My mother stood up and I felt Leo's hand tighten around mine under the table. I could feel the tension radiating from him, the same tension I was feeling. I want to talk about sacrifice, my mother began, her voice trembling slightly. About the sacrifices we make as mothers, the dreams we have for our children, the hopes we carry in our hearts. I looked around the room. The guests were expectant, waiting for a toast, but something in my mother's tone felt off. It was too raw, too personal, too full of something that wasn't joy. I always dreamed that Rebecca would marry someone. Impressive, my mother continued. Someone who would take care of her. Someone who would provide for her. Someone who would give her the life she deserves. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Leo's hand tightened on mine. I could feel his tension, his worry, his hurt. Leo is a good man, my mother said, and the words sounded forced. A kind man, a devoted man, but he's a teacher, a high school teacher, and I can't help but wonder, will it be enough? Will he be able to give Rebecca the life she deserves? The tears came then, big, wet, theatrical tears that dripped down her cheeks and splashed onto her silk blouse. She was crying at my wedding, crying because I'd married a teacher instead of a doctor. I sat frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was sit there, my hand in Leo's, as my mother's words hung in the air like poison. I'm sorry, my mother said, dabbing at her eyes. I'm sorry. I wanted more for her. I wanted everything for her, and I'm afraid she's settling. The room was silent. You could have heard a pin drop. 200 people and not a single one dared to break the silence. Then Leo spoke. Mrs. Ashford, he said, his voice calm and steady. I know I'm not what you imagined for your daughter. I know I'm not a doctor or a lawyer. I know I don't have the salary or the status you dreamed of, but I love Rebecca. I love her more than anything in this world. I will spend every day of my life trying to make her happy, and I promise you she will never settle. She's marrying me because she loves me, and I will spend my whole life proving I'm worthy of that love. The tears were streaming down my face now. I looked at my husband, this kind, gentle, extraordinary man who had just defended me in front of everyone, and I felt a surge of love so powerful it almost knocked me off my chair. But then I looked at my mother. She wasn't crying anymore. Her tears had stopped as suddenly as they'd started. She was staring at Leo with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not gratitude, not acceptance, something else. Something that looked a lot like resentment. You'll forgive me, my mother said, her voice brittle. I'm just a mother who wants what's best for her daughter. She sat down. The room slowly came back to life. People started talking again, laughing again, pretending the last few minutes hadn't happened. But I couldn't pretend. I couldn't forget. My mother had just humiliated my husband on our wedding day. She'd cried because I'd married a teacher instead of a doctor. She'd made it clear, in front of everyone we loved, that she didn't approve of my choice. I looked at Leo. He was pale, his jaw tight. I could see the hurt in his eyes, the sting of my mother's words. He'd tried to hide it, tried to be strong, but I knew him too well. My mother's words had cut deep. I'm sorry, I whispered. I'm so sorry. He shook his head. It's not your fault. She's your mother. You can't control her. But I knew that from this moment forward, something had changed, something that couldn't be undone. My mother had drawn a line in the sand, and I had to decide which side I was on. The reception limped along after my mother's speech. The music played, the cake was cut, the toasts were made, but the joy had been sucked out of the room. Every smile felt forced. Every laugh sounded hollow. I went through the motions like a puppet on strings, smiling when I was supposed to smile, nodding when I was supposed to nod, but inside I was screaming. Leo was a trooper. He danced with me, held my hand, made sure I had something to eat. He was trying so hard to make the night special, to salvage what was left of our wedding day. But I could see the hurt in his eyes. I could see the way his jaw tightened whenever someone mentioned my mother's speech. I could see the way his shoulders tensed when my mother approached. She came to us near the end of the reception, her smile firmly back in place as if nothing had happened. What a lovely evening, she said, as if she hadn't just humiliated my husband in front of everyone we loved. I hope you both have a wonderful honeymoon. I stared at her, my mouth open. I couldn't believe she was acting like everything was fine. I couldn't believe she had the audacity to stand there and pretend she hadn't just torn our wedding day apart. We'll see you when we get back, I said, my voice flat. I didn't hug her. I didn't kiss her cheek. I just stood there, my hand tight in Leo's, waiting for her to leave. She hesitated for a moment, as if expecting something more. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd of guests. The honeymoon was a blur. We'd booked a small cottage by the sea, a place I'd dreamed of visiting since I was a girl, but the beauty of the ocean couldn't wash away the sting of my mother's words. I spent the first few days in a fog, replaying her speech in my head, trying to understand how she could be so cruel. I'm sorry, I said to Leo over and over again. I'm sorry she did that to you. I'm sorry you had to hear that. I know, he said, his voice patient. It's not your fault. She's your mother. You can't control what she says. But I could control my response. And I was starting to realize that my response had to be something more than just saying sorry. I had to set boundaries. I had to make it clear that her behavior was unacceptable. I had to protect my husband and my marriage. When we returned from our honeymoon, I called my mother. My hands were shaking as I dialed her number. My heart was pounding. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say 100 times, but I still felt unprepared. "Mother," I said when she answered. "We need to talk." "Of course, dear," she said, her voice light and casual. "How was the honeymoon?" "Let's not pretend," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Let's not pretend like nothing happened. You humiliated my husband at our wedding. You cried because I married a teacher instead of a doctor. You made it clear to everyone that you don't approve of my marriage." My mother was silent for a moment. Then she sighed, and there was no apology in the sound. "I was just being honest," she said. "I was expressing my concerns. That's what mothers do." "Your concerns?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You called my husband a disappointment. You said I was settling. You made my wedding day about your disappointment instead of our love." "I wasn't trying to hurt you," my mother said, but there was a defensive edge to her voice. "I was trying to protect you. You don't understand. You have no idea what it's like to watch your daughter throw away her future." "Throw away her future?" I laughed, and the sound was bitter. "I married a wonderful man who loves me. That's not throwing away my future. That's building one." My mother was silent again. When she spoke, her voice was cold. "You're making a mistake," she said, "but I suppose you'll have to learn that on your own." "I'm not making a mistake," I said, "and I'm not going to let you treat Leo like he's less than just because he's not a doctor. He's my husband. He's my family. And if you can't respect that, then I can't have you in my life." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. I could hear my mother's breathing on the other end of the line, could feel the weight of her silence. "You'll regret this," she finally said. "When you're older, when you realize what you've given up, you'll regret this." "I don't think I will," I said, "but I know I'll regret it if I let you keep treating us this way." I hung up the phone. I stood in my kitchen, the receiver still in my hand, and I waited for the guilt to come. It didn't. All I felt was a strange sense of peace. A calm that I hadn't felt in years. I'd done the right thing. I'd protected my marriage. I'd set a boundary. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I'd taken control. But setting a boundary is one thing. Maintaining it is another. The weeks that followed were difficult. My mother didn't call. She didn't text. She didn't reach out in any way. I knew she was waiting for me to apologize, to crawl back to her and admit I was wrong. But I wasn't wrong, and I wasn't going to apologize. My father, on the other hand, did reach out. He called me at work one afternoon, his voice uncertain and awkward. "Your mother is upset," he said. "She's been crying for days. She doesn't understand why you're being so difficult." "Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You were there. You heard her speech. You heard what she said about Leo." "I know," my father said, and there was a weariness in his voice. "I know she was out of line, but you have to understand. She just wants what's best for you. She just loves you so much that she can't see past her own expectations. Loving me doesn't give her the right to humiliate my husband," I said. "And I'm not going to apologize for standing up for my marriage." My father sighed. "I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm just asking you to be patient. Your mother needs time to adjust. She's been dreaming of this day for years, and it didn't turn out the way she imagined." "Whose fault is that?" I asked. "She built up these expectations in her head. She never asked me what I wanted. She never considered that I might have my own dreams." "She loves you," my father repeated, as if that made everything okay. "I know she loves me," I said, "but love isn't enough when it comes with conditions." We ended the call. I sat at my desk, staring at my computer screen, feeling a mix of sadness and relief. I'd said what needed to be said. I'd stood my ground, but it still hurt. My mother's side of the family, the ones she'd always been closest to, began to weigh in. My aunt called, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Your mother is devastated," she said. "She doesn't understand why you're being so difficult." "I'm not being difficult," I said. "I'm setting boundaries." "Boundaries," my aunt repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "You're turning your back on your mother. Your own mother." "I'm not turning my back on her," I said. "I'm asking her to respect my husband, that's all." My cousin, who had always been my mother's favorite, sent me a long text message. "You're making a huge mistake," she wrote. "Your mother has done everything for you. She's given you everything. How can you be so selfish?" I read the message and I felt the familiar sting of guilt, but I also felt something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time: determination. I wasn't going to let anyone, my mother, my aunt, my cousin, make me feel like I was wrong for protecting my marriage. That's when I realized I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. I needed support. I needed to talk to someone who would understand. I called my sister Vanessa. She'd been quiet throughout the whole ordeal. I'd expected her to take my mother's side, to lecture me about being ungrateful. But instead, she listened. She actually listened. "Mom is being unreasonable," she said. "I know she's upset. I know she's disappointed. But she has no right to treat Leo like that. I'm glad you see that," I said. I was starting to think I was going crazy. "You're not crazy," Vanessa said. "You're protecting your marriage. That's what you're supposed to do." We talked for an hour. She told me about her own struggles with our mother, the pressure to be perfect, the constant criticism, the guilt. She understood what I was going through, and knowing that I wasn't alone made all the difference. The next few months were hard. I continued to maintain my boundaries, to refuse to apologize for standing up for my husband. My mother continued to ignore me. We spoke at holidays, but it was always surface level, always careful. But I had Leo, and I had my sister, and I had the knowledge that I'd done the right thing. I thought about my mother's speech at the wedding. I thought about the tears she'd cried. I thought about how she'd made my wedding day about her disappointment, and I realized that in a way I pitied her. She'd spent so many years building up a fantasy of what my life should be that she couldn't accept the reality. But I wasn't going to live my life according to her fantasy. I was going to live it according to mine. and that was what mattered. The first Christmas after the wedding was the hardest. I'd always loved Christmas. The lights, the music, the gathering of family. But this year, the thought of facing my mother filled me with dread. Maybe we should stay home, I suggested to Leo the week before the holiday. Just the two of us, a quiet Christmas. Leo looked at me with that patient expression he'd perfected over the years. Is that what you want? Or is that what you think you should do? I sighed. I don't know. I'm scared. I'm scared of what she'll say. I'm scared she'll ruin another holiday. Then let's go, he said. Let's go together. We'll face it together. And if she says something, we'll leave. Simple as that, I nodded. It was a simple solution, but it felt brave. It felt like I was finally taking control of my life. Christmas morning arrived gray and cold. We drove to my parents' house, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounding. Leo reached over and squeezed my hand. We've got this, he said. I'm right here. My sister Vanessa was already there when we arrived. She hugged me tight, her warm embrace a small comfort. I'm glad you came, she whispered. I've missed you. My mother appeared in the doorway. She looked older than I remembered, her face lined with worry and exhaustion. For a moment, she looked like she might cry, but she didn't. She just nodded stiffly and said, Merry Christmas, Rebecca. Merry Christmas, Leo. Merry Christmas, Mom, I said, my voice steady, despite the tremor in my hands. We filed into the living room where my father was already seated with his coffee. The conversation was stilted, awkward. We talked about the weather, about work, about everything except the elephant in the room. And then my mother spoke. I've been thinking, she said, her voice quiet, about what happened at the wedding, about what I said. I looked up surprised. I hadn't expected her to bring it up. I hadn't expected her to acknowledge it at all. It was wrong of me, she continued. I was wrong. I've been wrong for a long time. The room fell silent. My father stared at his coffee. Vanessa looked down at her hands. Leo reached over and took my hand. I'm sorry, my mother said. I'm sorry for what I said. I'm sorry for hurting you. I'm sorry for making you feel like Leo wasn't good enough. I stared at her, my eyes welling with tears. I hadn't expected this. I'd expected more arguments, more criticism, more disappointment, but this was something I'd never dared to hope for. Mom, I said, my voice cracking. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, my mother said. I just needed you to know that I'm sorry. I've been so afraid of losing you that I pushed you away. I've been so focused on what I wanted for you that I forgot to ask what you wanted for yourself. The tears were streaming down my face now. I looked at Leo and he was crying too. My mother stood up and walked over to me. She wrapped her arms around me and I felt the warmth of her embrace for the first time in months. I love you, she whispered. I've always loved you, and I'm so sorry. I hugged her back, feeling the tension of the last several months slowly begin to melt away. I love you too, Mom, I said. I've always loved you. We stood there, holding each other as the rest of the family watched. I didn't feel like I was giving in. I didn't feel like I was weak. I felt like I was finally healing, like the wound that had been festering for so long was finally beginning to close. We spent the rest of the day together, talking, laughing, eating. My mother was different, softer, more present. She asked Leo about his work, and when he talked about his students, she listened. Really listened. They're lucky to have you, she told him. You're a good teacher. I saw the surprise in Leo's eyes, followed by a genuine smile. Thank you, he said. That means a lot. After dinner, my mother pulled me aside. I want you to know, she said, that I'm still learning. I'm still trying to understand, but I'm going to do better. I promise. I know you will, I said. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm just asking you to try. Months passed. The relationship between my mother and me slowly improved. She still had moments of criticism. Still had moments where I could see the old disappointment flickering in her eyes, but she was trying. She was making an effort, and that meant the world. The biggest test came when Leo was nominated for a teaching award. It was a regional award given to educators who went above and beyond for their students. I'd never been more proud of him. I invited my parents to the ceremony. I knew it was a risk. I knew that, even after everything, my mother might still find a way to diminish his achievement. But I also knew that if we were ever going to move forward, I had to give her the chance. The ceremony was held at a local university. Leo wore his suit, the same one he'd worn to our wedding. He was nervous, shifting his weight, running his hands through his hair. I reached out and took his hand. You're going to win, I said. I can feel it. I don't care if I win, he said. I'm just proud to be nominated, proud to represent my students. He did win. When they called his name, the audience erupted in applause. I was on my feet, clapping and cheering, tears streaming down my face. My husband, the man my mother had called a disappointment, was being recognized for his extraordinary work. And then I looked at my mother. She was clapping too. She was clapping and she was crying. Not tears of disappointment this time, but tears of pride. He did it, she said, when I looked at her. He really did it. I nodded. I told you he was something special. I know, she said, and I could hear the regret in her voice. I know you did. I just didn't see it. After the ceremony, my mother walked over to Leo. She hugged him. A real hug, the kind that said she finally understood. I'm proud of you, she told him. I'm proud to call you my son-in-law. Leo's eyes widened. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Thank you for giving me a chance. They stood there, my mother and my husband, and I saw something shift between them. Something that had been broken was finally beginning to heal. That night, as Leo and I drove home, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. The tension was gone. The anger was gone. All that was left was gratitude. Thank you, I told him. Thank you for being patient with my mother. Thank you for being patient with me. Thank you for never giving up on us. Never, he said, reaching over to take my hand. I'll never give up on you. On us. On this family. I squeezed his hand, and I felt the tears welling up again. But these were different tears. These were tears of joy. A year after the wedding, my mother and I had coffee together. Just the two of us. She'd changed. She was softer, more open, more willing to listen. We talked about the past, about the mistakes she'd made. I was so focused on what I thought was important, she said. Success, status, security. I thought that was what mattered. I thought that was what would make you happy. But it wasn't what made me happy, I said. What makes me happy is Leo. What makes me happy is building a life that feels true to me. She nodded. I see that now. I see how happy he makes you. I see how happy you are. And that's all I ever wanted. I just didn't know how to see it before. I reached across the table and took her hand. You're learning, I said. That's all I ever asked for. We sat there, mother and daughter, in the quiet of the coffee shop. And for the first time in my life, I felt like she really saw me. Not the daughter she'd dreamed of, not the daughter she'd tried to mold, just me, just Rebecca, that was enough.